September 19th. It's 10 a.m., which means it's time to track the tropics. From Central Florida, I'm WESH 2 meteorologist Eric Burris.
And from Savannah, Georgia, WJCL 22 Chief Meteorologist Jeremy Nelson.
All right, so Jeremy, it is kind of beautiful in both of our areas. We've got some subtle hints of fall, but we always have to remember when it comes to the tropics, fall is not all clear when it comes to the basin.
No, we're still within probably about that 6-week window of the peak of the season. So, yeah, there's more activity out there. We have a hurricane right now. I don't think that bothers anyone, but we also have a couple areas of interest, and the one probably a little more interesting for our area is yet to develop.
Yeah, so let's just take a look and kind of see what's doing. Old cold front sitting across South Florida. Hurricane Center has tagged it as having a low-end 30% chance of development. The idea here is that there will be an area of low pressure forming off the coast of Florida, and we're going to look at all the models, don't you worry. But if that area of low pressure tries to take some subtropical characteristics, then, Jeremy, we could be talking about some sort of a subtropical depression, subtropical storm, but thankfully not enough time for anything to get massive.
Right, that's what we're thinking right now. And for your area, it's kind of like you just get to wave at it as it develops and then moves to the north. But my area will continue to monitor it. I definitely think the trends, though, with the models have been to take this more towards maybe northern South Carolina, North Carolina, or somewhere towards the Outer Banks, and maybe even off the East Coast. At least that's a GFS. So we'll look at models in just a moment, but this is a system that should stay weaker. But definitely, I think it could end up being named.
Yeah, and if it is, of course, the next name is Ophelia, but it would be interesting to see, Jeremy, which way it goes, because there's other systems that are also trying to form. Let me take you all the way over to the coast of Africa, the main development region during the peak of hurricane season. Nothing out there currently. You see those clouds over the kind of central Atlantic? That's not expected to develop, but models do take a rigorous wave off the shoreline of Africa and try to develop it. Hurricane Center giving it a high 70% likelihood of formation and says a tropical depression is possible late this week or into the weekend. But if you kind of figure out the timing, late this week into the weekend, there's no guarantee that one, Jeremy, even if both of these form, there's no guarantee that one would necessarily form before another. So it's not like we know which one would be first.
Right. And you said Ophelia, and then I think Philippe is after that one. So we already have 15 storms this season, 14 named, the unnamed, and then a couple more that could bring us up to 17. So the names, they've added up very quickly this year.
Yeah. We are already, in terms of the numbers at least, in terms of named storms, we're already at an average hurricane season. And we can get into, of course, the ACE score and all that stuff a little bit later on. But, when you just look at this graphic, I always like to use this as just kind of a quick litmus test. We're 2/3 of the way through storm names on an El Nino summer, on a year that certainly could have gone much, much quieter given the Enzo condition. But when we put out our hurricane forecast, we knew that it wasn't going to be a quiet season at the least.
Yeah, and I mean, hindsight's 2020, and looking back now, I guess maybe we should have gone another one or two higher, but we were definitely going straight into the sort of the headwinds of everyone saying, hey, this El Nino is just going to squash things down. We always thought the Atlantic Ocean itself would be very busy. That's what has happened. And now, if we do get this thing named down off the southeast coast and it does move up to the Carolinas, that's another move into one of our hotspots for the season.
For sure. And it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. But I also think, Jeremy, we put out our forecast March 1st, and that was, we do it so early that even putting out an average season forecast in that moment was very, very off the beaten path.
Yeah, and we've done this a lot, and it's not to say anything bad about the other forecasts, but if you just compare it to probably the two or bigger forecasts, Colorado State and also the National Hurricane Center / NOAA, our numbers were higher than those on the top end preseason. So I think our forecast overall gave people the right idea. We'll see what the final numbers end up being. Maybe it's in our range, but probably going to end up being closer to maybe around 20 storms, possibly.
Yeah. No, I think that that's absolutely correct. And it's interesting because when we look at the season by numbers, right? Here we are, we're at September 19th. We're definitely on that backside of the peak of hurricane season, but most of the activity forms from kind of mid-August through mid-October. So we're still very much, and then there's like a secondary peak mid-October through November. So there's still plenty of time, but the focus shifts from the open Atlantic waters during the peak of hurricane season. By the end of hurricane season, we start to watch more of the Caribbean and the Gulf of Mexico, these old fronts that kind of start dying out just a little bit.
Yeah, and we're almost seeing a little bit of that coming up late this week, talking about something might form near an old front. And also, I mean, we're sort of getting to the end of the life cycle here of the long-range forecast we use to sort of pinpoint things. But I did a pretty deep analysis this week. I know I mentioned to you that this is fitting almost right on schedule. And if this would take the track that GFS is, it's moving right into the spot on cycle of the unnamed storm back in January. So we'll see where it moves, but almost every part of this part of the pattern we're in right now had a little trough or something near Florida off the southeast coast, and then in some of those cycles, the low developed and moved northeast.
Right. So when we look at this overall pattern, let's just kind of get an idea. We know that, Nigel is out in the open Atlantic. That's not a big deal. But let's just take a minute and kind of look at this setup. So there's an old front pushing in drier air to the Carolinas, to Georgia, and to central Florida. I mean, our dew point temperatures here were lovely today. And I know that you had a nice cool morning, Jeremy. But tomorrow into Thursday, we start to watch off the east coast of Florida this little area of low pressure forming. And then Friday, Saturday, Sunday, it kind of lifts to the north. And while there's no guarantee in terms of positioning, it will be interesting to see, Jeremy, how this kind of plays out based on the different model synopses.
Yes, and I think the good thing is, for at least my area, I always say it for us, selfishly good news, is that we'll be on the west side of this. It's a drier side, potentially a little bit cooler air in place. So I think we would have less impacts here.
Right.
We might get a breezy day or two out of this. And when I say breezy, maybe winds 10, 20 miles per hour, gusts 25. We'll see how it plays out. Rain showers doesn't look like a lot for us. This could be more like northern South Carolina into North Carolina, or potentially into the mid-Atlantic if it moves up there. But not a huge impact system. I think if it would have lingered longer down near Florida, the models now sort of move it a little bit, but there could have been a coastal flood threat. I'm not quite sure if that will get going or not.
Yeah, and it all depends, right, on the kind of fine-tuning of what happens. So I've got the Futurecast model pulled up, Jeremy. So if you want to kind of take everybody through what it's showing, and I'll just kind of run it for you.
Okay, so this is the IBM, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so this one just goes out 72 hours, and this is the graph of the IBM model, which sort of the in-house high resolution. This one, I would say, is maybe a little bit closer to the GFS, only potentially a little bit farther east. We found that the IBM model has done fairly well in regards to tropical systems. So if you look at that, I don't know on yours, do you have a little ruler to show how far off the coast it is? If you don't, no big deal. But that probably, to me, that almost looks like the center there, probably close to like 250 plus miles, depending where you're at.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, from like Savannah, you're talking 285. From Tybee, like 280. Charleston, 216.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, that's pretty far off the coast. I always like to tell people when we had and this is a totally different animal, but when Hurricane Matthew came, I think that was within about 20 miles of our coastline.
Yep.
No official landfall. Dorian was the eye of it, which was very well pronounced, was about 70 miles offshore. So you're talking about something that's, at least on this one model, going to stay pretty far off and be fairly weak.
Right. So let's do this. Let's move on and let's take a look at the 6Z GFS model, okay? And I don't have the streamlines on that one, but we'll be okay. So graphic full. Okay. All right. So let's load that one up. 6Z GFS, and kind of watching how it's trying to develop something off the East Coast there and paralleling the coastline and kind of strengthening it, frankly, right? Like by by Saturday, it's getting to be a decent little, perhaps a subtropical storm, a strong subtropical storm, but off the Outer Banks, and then keeping it out to sea and away from land.
Yeah, and if I don't know if you're able to move that map, but if you move that farther out to this weekend, Sunday or into Monday, let's look at where that position is. And if people remember that unnamed storm, well, it was right there.
Okay, yeah. So there's the graphic right there.
Yep. So I mean that's right on cycle, and if it would play out that way, that'd be pretty amazing. Kind of the final end to our cycling weather pattern, because once we get into October, we're really starting to watch for the new features.
Yeah. I wouldn't mind it. I apologize. When we run it off the cuff like that, Jeremy, I can't put the Track in the Tropics logo up there. I apologize.
Oh, no, that's all right. That's all right. I think all we want to see there is kind of it's staying off the coast. At least that model is. The Euro does sort of bring it into North Carolina and then weaken it very quickly.
Here, I'll pull up the Euro just for sake of argument, just so that we can chat about that. So there's the European, kind of developing it. And then kind of, like bringing, you can see
maybe
the
Myrtle
center.
Beach, Myrtle Beach or Grand Strand area.
Yep. And then bringing it in. So there's not really huge model consistency yet, but that's to be expected because it hasn't even formed yet.
Right. And yeah, that's one thing here, that where it forms obviously will be a key. And these models have not been very consistent.
Right. We know something's going to get going, but the reality is we don't even know if there's going to be a subtropical element to it. We know that happens, where you've got an old front bubbling things up. Either way, though, think about it like this. For my area, kind of interestingly enough, it's going to grab some of that. What was your morning temperature this morning?
We were down to 60.
Yeah, okay, so we were at 75 in Orlando. Like 68 up in our northern areas. So as this area of low pressure starts to spin, it's actually going to grab some of that autumn air and drag it further south. So we're actually, for me personally, I'm looking forward to perhaps getting a little taste of fall from this thing.
Yeah, we had dew points this morning in the upper 50s. I'm sure you were still around 70.
But we were, the dew point in Orlando was like 66, 67. Dew point up in Ocala was 62. It's something.
A slight improvement.
When you're at 75 for 6 months, you'll take what you can get. So
it's still only September, and I tell people basically May through September, you kind of get summer conditions. So.
Yeah. So it'll be interesting. But I think the important thing, Jeremy, is that this is not expected to become a big bad hurricane.
Right.
Period.
Yeah, that's something that kind of off the table a little bit, looking at all the models, and I think the only way it could get much stronger is if it would just kind of stay a little bit off that Carolinas and then maybe miss the Outer Banks and then just head its way to the northeast. It might have a little more chance of getting stronger if that happens.
Absolutely. So let's do this. Let's take a look at kind of the raw computer models and just kind of run through things. So there's Nigel lifting, recurving. Right there, you can see off the coast of the southeastern United States, there is our little thing. And this is the GFS, so the GFS wants to keep it off the shoreline. Okay, so that's good. We're fine with that. And then again, if we widen it out, you can kind of see it keeping it off the entire eastern seaboard and putting it right there. That would be on Monday morning at 2 a.m. in Jeremy. That's kind of where that January system was.
Yeah, it was off from the New England northeast coast by a good measure, and that's where the GFS is tracking this. We'll see what happens.
Right.
And then Nigel stays away. And did that start to pick up on that other wave off from the west coast of Africa? There?
Yeah, if you look right here, you've got like 3 areas, one near the Turks and Caicos, north of Puerto Rico, one off of Nova Scotia, and one kind of in the central Atlantic. So this is, that's Saturday, September 30th. So it's a little ways out, but the model's kind of showing a smorgasbord of stuff. But at least in this moment, none of that is really threatening even Bermuda. Now, there you could kind of see something going into like the Canadian Maritimes, but it'll be, and then this kind of caught my eye here. So this is October 1st. Let me go back to our kind of closer in view. You've got something east of the Turks and Caicos and lowering pressure in the Gulf of Mexico, kind of a blob of moisture over Florida and eventually working up to your area. That's a hint of something interesting.
Yeah, I haven't really seen. What hour is that? Is that how
That's
far out?
324. Yeah, like 312. I mean, you're talking way out, 312 hours from now.
Okay. Yeah, that's pretty far out. I mean, if you want to talk here, I'm going to go hop in and look at another model that goes out longer range just to see if it has anything. You said hours 300, 300 plus?
Yeah, like 312, yeah. So while you're doing that, Jeremy, so this is the GFS kind of showing that. Now, if we go and switch over to the GFS ensemble plots, there are some members that are trying, there's a lot of these areas of low pressure around, but some members are trying to show some sort of storm system around there. That's way out. If we go back one ensemble back, kind of showing some stuff. If we go two ensembles back, showing some stuff. So, there's at least some hints that there could be something around October 1st or so. Whether or not that plays out is yet to be seen. There's a subtle mention of that. And then outside of that, we're all nice and quiet. European, we'll just go back out to the basin view and just check that, make sure we're good. We'll start from scratch. There's Nigel recurving. We've got that little area of low pressure. But remember, the European was bringing that ashore into like Myrtle Beach and the Grand Strand there of northern South Carolina. And then from there, we look back out to the wide basin, another wave recurving. And that's as far out as the 0Z European goes. We switch over to the Canadian. Let's just take a look at that, see what it's doing. Not seeing anything crazy on the Canadian either. The Canadian is taking that area of low pressure that forms off of the coast of Florida and brings it in right around the North Carolina-South Carolina border. So, again, it all depends on like where it forms, how deep it gets, that sort of thing. Nothing is set in stone regarding the future of that. And then, come down the line, let's just look at some of the global ensembles and see. We'll go home. We'll go to multi-member. I just want to look and see the 6Z ensemble showing that development. That's fine. And then afterward, a recurvature. And then right at the very end, that's October 2nd and 3rd. Some ensemble members coming alive around the Gulf and the Caribbean of something on the European, so that's kind of something interesting. The Canadian, interestingly enough, is showing that same time frame of the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd, Jeremy, of some sort of something perhaps trying to come alive from the Caribbean/Gulf across Florida and then off the eastern seaboard. That'll be interesting to see what happens there.
Yeah, so the other thing that I looked at here, this longer range, did not have what you're showing, but it did have sort of that ridge sitting on top of that area. And that's sometimes we refer to that the ridge over troubled water. So you can get something developing underneath that. So I think that's definitely a time frame to keep an eye on as we go from September into early October.
Yeah. Priscilla says a very active season, but thankfully nothing serious, at least for your area and my area. We did have major Hurricane Idalia make landfall on the Nature Coast, but there's a lot of nature up there. The impacted areas got hit hard, but thankfully there's not a huge population of that. But once we get into October, Jeremy, and we kind of just briefly mentioned that, then we start to get into our new cycling pattern. We have to use some new tools just to kind of give us an idea of long-range stuff.
Yeah, and once we get into early October, when we talk on Tuesdays, if we don't really have a whole lot going on, we'll certainly update you on some things we are watching, because Eric uses his high-tech notes that he takes on his computer, and I'll be writing them down in a little calendar, and we'll team up here and keep you updated. So, yeah, we're really watching closely October, November, when the pattern starts to set up. Identifying the where some of these stronger highs and lows are located, ridges and troughs, and where they reach peak intensity, and especially if there's something that is near the Caribbean, Gulf of Mexico, southeast or east coast, and it happens to be tropical in nature, October and November, that really piques our interest. And then we take that information, we'll get another cycle or two in before we issue our forecast for the next hurricane season on March the 1st.
A couple of people are asking, what specific date does that recycle, Jeremy? Or the new pattern setup, I guess.
I would say we really start to watch October 7th, 10th on, because there has to be, there isn't just a hard start and stop date. There has to be some sort of transition, and we're not 100% certain if that's late September, if it's the first few days of October. But I definitely think, though, what's coming up is really fitting into that unnamed storm part where it looks like it could just plop right into that same area.
Right. And then after that, it's no man's land, and we kind of have to resort to some other techniques. So we do have some other techniques. One of them is the Bering Sea rule, where we can kind of look up around Alaska and get some teleconnection information. Essentially, look, when it comes to science, if there's one thing I'm grateful for, it's the idea that you always have to try things and push the science forward. And I'm so grateful that Jeremy has he's old enough that he can be my mentor on these sorts of things, and I appreciate
Not
that.
Not that old yet.
But, we're using some of these newer techniques to kind of get ideas on what's coming down the pike. And the Bering Sea rule, Jeremy, is one of those techniques. Do you want to kind of explain that? Because that's one of those things that that we're definitely going to start to resort to here these next couple of weeks.
Yeah, so we actually used it to help confirm our thoughts on Idalia, and Eric showed that probably 2 or 3 weeks before we had any idea that something could be forming. And we really try to focus, though, on maybe a stronger low in that North Pacific area. And we found that there is some sort of connection to our area, maybe about like 15 to 18, 19 days down the road.
Yep.
And so what you're looking at right there, and it's sort of hard for the average person to grasp this, is those highs and lows that you're looking at, the surface features are actually in the North Pacific and up towards Alaska. And then we are overlaying kind of a hypothetical U.S. coastline of what we have paired up with that area.
So, like, for example, there's kind of an interesting... That's September 19th, Jeremy. Okay, so based strictly on the BSR, that's September 19th, which would correlate to, as I pull out my calendar.
I mean, that could be that towards the back half of week 1 of October.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So 1, 2, 1, 2. Yeah. So that's like October 6th-ish, right? So based on this, around October 6th, theoretically, there should be a decent little storm system kind of moving into the northeastern United States, and a front kind of fading over Florida, bringing a bunch of moisture over Florida. So that's October 6th. So then the question arises, and of course, as I'm trying to play director here as well as, but Jeremy, based on that, October 6th should theoretically give us a little storm system around Florida and a cold front, right?
Yeah, I think it's possible. There's lots of lows there, and I think that would at least introduce maybe looking at those maps, a little bigger change to parts of the eastern third of the country.
October. I mean, there's
sometimes it's hard to determine if these would be tropical or not. Just pending over the location they're at. Sometimes we can kind of hint hey, maybe we get an area of interest or something like that. But it's just areas that we're monitoring, and it gives us a little clue of what might be next.
This is the GFS for October 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th. So there's that, there's a storm. Remember, it's that storm system we were looking at moving from the Gulf to the Atlantic side? That lines up directly with this, with all of those areas of low pressure kind of moving from the Gulf across Florida. Isn't that something?
Yeah, so I think next week at this time we'd have a much better idea. A few more models would be within range. Euro would be getting close, and we'll see what happens. Do you have any questions here today?
Yeah. Let's see. So Laura, can we do the BSR for 15:30 Central Time when you're at the station? Oh, for 3:30 today. Oh, you can vote when I do my afternoon coffee talk. They're asking about the BSR. Yeah, we can look at that. I'm doing the 4:00 news today though, y'all. So I'm gonna have a bunch of other stuff happening. So I'll do my best. If not, I can do it tomorrow morning. Okay,
so here's a question for you. Explain the difference between the global ensemble model versus, say, GFS or Euro.
Yeah, okay. So think about it like this. It's a great question. So the GFS is a model. right? And it's a good model. They're all good. They're not great, but they're all good. But once the GFS is done running, once the European is done running, then they go back, and it's kind of like going back for seconds, but instead of getting just spaghetti and meatball, maybe you'll get spaghetti and you'll throw on some cheese on top of it. The idea is once it runs its run, it goes back and reruns itself like 50 different ways. The GFS has a certain number of ensemble members, the European does. And all it is, it's different flavors of the same thing. So what you end up with is you end up getting the GFS. And then you get like, well, this is 50 different versions of it. And it's kind of like children. Every version's a little different, right? So what you then are able to discern from that is you get the GFS. And then you say, oh, well, most of the GFS ensemble members have started leaning more this way or more that way. Or in a storm systems perspective, there's a big question. You know, they're not tightly in agreement. If they're all tightly in agreement, then you know that the GFS has a good idea. But if they're there and then all of a sudden they diverge, you know there's not a high confidence. So to me, it's kind of a great thing because the ensemble members give you an idea of confidence and consistency throughout the model itself. How's that? Long-winded?
I think that's good. It's just a model that runs a lot of different ways after the main operational run is down. So what we typically show on TV, if it's not a whole bunch of squiggly lines or lows sitting around, is the operational run. And sometimes if we don't believe it, we won't show it. But if we think it's done a good job, then the operational run is typically what we will show.
Yeah.
If we're showing something like that IBM model, that's a one-off high-resolution model within 72 hours. You don't get a whole bunch of spin-offs of that.
Yeah, that's the problem. And you know, I would love to be able to show ensembles in our weather computer, but the designing, you know, the company that makes our weather computer, which is currently IBM, they've sold it off, but they haven't put ensemble members in there. And I think that it's probably because, Jeremy, like we do this like nerd thing, but not a lot of people do. And so it's kind of like how many people would use pressure and anomalous pressure ensemble? Like how many people? Maybe what's his face up in Chicago would.
Tom Skilling.
Tom Skilling would, right.
He's the master of showing a lot of maps and sort of having it all make sense to the average person.
Yeah. But aside from like the nerd Facebook Lives or Tom Skilling, you're not going to get it happening.
Right.
All right, let's see here. Any other questions anybody has? So looking at the lows around Florida for early October doesn't really show a bad situation that may brew up in the Gulf. You know, Terry, these are all just indicators, right, Jeremy? I mean, we don't know anything bad or good yet.
Right. And that really what we're looking for is just that, hey, there might be lower pressures, low pressure in this certain area. And then, hey, maybe it does end up developing into something. So right now we have a couple clues that, hey, maybe in that first week of October, especially the middle or end of that first week, something might try to move into the Gulf. Is it tropical or not? We would fill those details in later.
Yeah. And the neat thing is doing the Tracking the Tropics broadcast on Tuesdays. At the very least, you're going to know what's happening and you're going to know what we're kind of watching. You know, we're peeling back the curtain. Jeremy, when tropical systems impact your area or may look like they do, how many people text you or maybe your wife and they're like, hey, what's Jeremy thinking?
A lot of people will ask or direct message. And I think social media is great when we're sort of far out from these things. We have maybe a little more time or can dedicate more to answering questions. If you have Idalia, when that moved in, bearing down within 24 hours, I mean, we start working 12-hour shifts. Yeah. And even when we're not working, we're updating things. And that gets a little tougher to keep people updated. I'm really like, hey, we're on right now. Our whole team is watching it, so get the updates that way. So if you get really in close, it's harder to update people. When you're maybe 3+ days out, it's a little easier to answer some questions.
And I think that formats like this are super great because we can sit there and say something like, there's nothing in the Bay of Campeche if you're asking about it, you know, whatever it may be, you know?
Yeah, and I think people are looking in my area at this potential low this weekend, and they're more like, oh, hey, can we get some rain out of it as a positive, not like, oh, it's going to be this huge hurricane or anything like that, right. Especially since a lot of the models are just tracking it north.
Yeah, that's fine with me. So, all right, let's take a look real quick. And if you have other questions, you may ask those questions, but let's just take a look real quick, Jeremy, and see where we are for the year. Of course, hold on a second. Had to change the buttons. Okay. All right. So far this year, we've had 15 named storms. The average through today's date, 9.5. Last year through today, we had 6. And that already is kind of an impressive stat, right? Like, we got hit a bunch last year, including a hit in November, which reminds everybody that can happen. But last year through today, we had only had 6 named storms. We are at 15 currently. Big, big difference.
Yeah, and 14 is average, so it's already just a little bit above average.
Yeah. All right. Named storm days. We've tracked a named system 66.75 days so far. And through today, the norm is 42.9. Last year we had 24. But this is the metric that, of course, everybody looks at, the accumulated cyclonic energy. A normal season is 121-ish, 122. I mean, Jeremy, we're just about there in the end of September.
Yeah, I think you add in Nigel, maybe a tiny bit of whatever's off the southeast coast this weekend, if it gets named briefly. We could be looking at a week from now, that number is at average or above.
Yeah, so let's just keep it all nice and quiet. So again, just a full kind of wrap of where we're at. We've got Hurricane Nigel in the central Atlantic, Category 1 storm, forecast to become a Category 2 and recurve. And real fast, we haven't even shown the track. This is a remarkable little thing. Between Bermuda and the Azores, it's out in the middle of no man's land, but it's not often, Jeremy, that we have a hurricane forecast cone go that far to the north. I mean, look at that map. I don't know that I've ever made a map that goes all the way up toward like Greenland and Iceland.
Yeah. Is that just is that subtropical, or is it more just a remnant low?
Yeah, it's like a remnant low at that point.
Okay. Yeah, Santa Claus gonna get a storm heading up there.
Yeah, that's something. So that's that. And then we've got the 2 other areas to watch. The one rolling off the coast of Africa, at least the global models are keeping it out to sea. And then that potentially subtropical thing off of the east coast of the United States. It's going to keep both of us busy the next couple of days. Jeremy, tracking it, not like freaking out busy, but just kind of like, how is it going to play into our forecast? Is it going to drag down some cooler, drier air, or whatever the case may be?
Yeah, and off to the side here, I'm looking at the IBM model's updating right now, and it still pretty much has that low position way off from Florida and like coastal Georgia. So,
here, I'll pull. That's the 12Z, right?
Yeah, it looks like it's out through maybe like 63 or 4 hours potentially now. I think through 63 hours.
That's as far out as it is. But you can see the low is, yeah, it's still way off the shoreline there.
Yeah, and it's only 1,009 millibars north of the Bahamas by probably 150, 200 miles. Fairly weak, could get a little bit stronger, but I mean, the farther east it develops, maybe the IBM is going to follow with GFS and keep it more towards eastern North Carolina and then maybe off the northeast coast.
Works for me. Works for me. All right, you have anything else to add, my friend?
Nope.
At some point today, if you want, we can work on that graphic for you, Jeremy.
Okay. Thank you so much.
I got you. Everybody else is like, what graphic? You'll see it on WJCL. All right.
So you're doing the 4 o'clock today?
The noon and 4.
Okay, so we just started at 4 o'clock as well. So I think I'm doing all the shows today. So it's once we hit the ground running, it's busy.
What I'll do is right after the noon, I'll ship them to you, and then I'll just log into your Prism and do the work and all that fun stuff.
Are you Tony tonight or not?
No, I am Cam today.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. All right. From beautiful low dew point central Florida, I'm West 2 meteorologist Eric Burris.
And from Savannah, Georgia, I'm WJCL 22 Chief Meteorologist Jeremy Nelson.
Let's keep the tropics quiet, Jeremy, and we'll see you on Tuesday.
All right. Take care.
Bye, bud.